I'm 44, and I always believed I was immune to aging's cliches. I had my career, my marriage, and absolute control over my body. But when the mirror started showing me a stranger, a tired, anxious, unpredictable woman, the control vanished overnight. I need to find the medical or psychological key to stabilize this aggressive physical and hormonal transformation before the emotional turmoil destroys my career and the relationship with my husband. The biggest obstacle isn't the aging itself, but the terrifying isolation that comes from fighting a debilitating war against the person I see reflected every morning. Will the real me ever return? Or am I lost inside this unfamiliar shell forever? The alarm went off at 6, but I was already awake. Waking up doesn't mean rested when you hit 44. It just means the body gave up trying to repair itself and decided to restart the clock. Anyway, I lay there for 5 minutes, calculating the precise physics required to throw my legs over the side of the mattress without engaging my lower back muscles. They were always the first to betray me now. They used to be invisible. Now they demand representation in every single movement. I finally managed the pivot. My feet hit the floor, and the usual minor protests began. A quick, sharp sting in the left heel, a dull ache behind the knees. That wasn't injury, just age. It's a weariness that has nothing to do with sleep deficit and everything to do with cumulative mileage. I walked to the bathroom, avoiding the overhead light. I didn't want the full audit yet. The biggest lie of midlife is that you know yourself better. I know my mind better, maybe. I know my triggers, my financial tolerance, and my preferred travel itinerary. But the physical self, the machine that carries all, that data, feels like a rented vehicle I just picked up at the airport. It has my keys, it answers to my name, but the handling is completely unfamiliar. I splashed cold water on my face. That's the moment the inventory truly begins. The skin is thinner now. Not just the wrinkles, I can live with the map lines, but the translucency. You can see the work the plumbing is doing just underneath. The eyes are tired in a way that coffee can't fix, a depth of exhaustion that only comes from years of performing tasks you no longer believe in, using fuel you don't have. I used to recognize the person in the glass. She was sharp, slightly impatient, built for speed. She could run a 5-mile loop after a 10-hour workday and feel energized. This person, the one staring back, is slower, thicker around the middle, not due to neglect, but due to some internal negotiation the metabolism had with gravity and decided to side with gravity. It's the silent frustration that kills you. You can't complain about it because it sounds like whining. My knees hurt when I stand up suddenly. So what? Everyone gets older. But the internal feeling isn't aging, it's alienation. I still feel 28 inside my head. The same curiosity, the same drive for change. But when I try to execute those 28-year-old plans, the 44-year-old body sends an emergency notification. System overload. Proceed with caution. I got dressed for the office. The clothes fit differently. Everything seems to cling to the parts of me that used to be smooth transitions. I spent years cultivating an identity that was agile and responsive. Now, everything is slightly stiff, slightly delayed. I felt the familiar surge of resentment toward the clock. Why does it take so much effort just to achieve? Baseline? Just to get out the door, fed, clothed, and prepared to deliver value? 20 years ago, that process took 40 minutes and a granola bar. Now it takes an hour and a half, 3 supplements, and a mental pep talk that barely skirts the edge of outright despair. I went downstairs. The house was quiet. The kids are teenagers now, sleeping the deep sleep of the unburdened. They don't require the constant, urgent physical attention they once did, but they require a different kind of stamina, the mental endurance needed to navigate their complex emotional architecture. That requires energy too, and I often feel like I'm showing up to a marathon having only trained for a sprint. I stood by the coffee maker, waiting for the ritual to complete itself. The coffee used to be a luxury, a pleasure. Now it's essential medical equipment. I know I have a good life. That's the cruel irony. I have stability, a successful career, a relatively healthy family structure. I achieved the goals I set out for myself in my 20s. But achieving them didn't give me the emotional reward I expected. It just gave me a heavier set of responsibilities and a body that insists on reminding me, every waking moment, that the warranty has expired. I picked up my briefcase. Time to go perform. Time to inhabit this stranger's body and pretend I know what I'm doing. Pretending I feel the same urgency and clarity I did when I was still certain about the future. The truth is, I'm exhausted, not from the work itself, but from the constant, silent battle required just to put on the uniform. The real question isn't whether I can finish the day. It's whether I can figure out how to reclaim the machinery before the person I used to be vanishes completely inside this shell. The world outside my window looked demanding and bright. I felt dull and muted. I opened the front door, stepping into the day, carrying the weight of a life I'd built, and the growing suspicion that I might have built it for someone else. The car engine started on the first try, a reliable machine obeying a simple command. I envied its simplicity. I put the gear selector into drive. 44 years old, and every physical movement felt rented. The body navigated the commute routes automatically, filtering brake lights and calculating merge times with cold efficiency. It was a well-trained instrument, except the musician had packed up and left. It was muscle memory driving the children to school, muscle memory sitting through the first meeting, muscle memory nodding at the right moments when someone inevitably asked, "How are you?" The lie came out clean and easy, a reflexive shield. Great. Busy. I thought about the word fatigue. This wasn't the kind you fix with a weekend or a solid 8 hours of sleep. This was structural exhaustion, bone deep, like the foundation of the house shifting. I wasn't just tired from doing things. I was tired of being the person who does those things. The machinery was running, but it was running on a completely different fuel source than the one that energized my actual self. I caught my reflection in the office window while waiting for the elevator. The skin, the lines, the posture, it was objectively me. But the recognition was purely intellectual, not visceral. It felt like looking at a professionally framed photograph of a distant relative. I knew the name, the history, but the emotional ownership was gone. Where did the heat go? The quick impatience, the sharp edges of youth, the easy laughter that used to bubble up. They were replaced by a smooth, polished politeness, a heavy veneer. This entire day was a high-stakes performance, and the cost of admission was authenticity. People talk about burnout from workload. That's often amateur hour. True, debilitating exhaustion comes from the constant internal translation, the relentless effort required to convert genuine, often complicated internal feeling into socially acceptable, neutral responses. It's the effort of maintaining the facade that kills. I sat in a strategy meeting discussing projections and deliverables. My brain was running 3 parallel streams simultaneously. 1. What the vice president was saying. 2. The appropriate professional response I should offer. 3. A small, quiet voice in the background, relentless and cold, asking, "Why are we still doing this? What is the actual point of all this motion?" That third voice was the stranger. It was the part of me that had checked out, refusing to participate in the charade but still trapped inside the vessel. I tried to remember the last time I felt completely unified, mind, body, action, in the same moment. Was it 20 years ago? Was it a single catastrophic event that caused the split? Or was it a million micro-decisions, tiny compromises that eroded the boundary until the self was just a dusty outline? I realized I had spent years optimizing for stability, optimizing for safety, optimizing for what looked successful from the outside. I achieved the goal. I built the fortress, sealed myself inside, and now, at 44, I was standing guard over an empty keep. The life I built for someone else was the life the younger me thought the older me should want. The flawless career, the perfectly functioning family unit, the expensive, quiet house. But the older me had shown up, taken one look at the pristine, suffocating structure, and felt nothing but heavy indifference. The task ahead was not exterior. It wasn't about quitting the job, booking a vacation, or chasing a sudden, dramatic change. It was purely archaeological. I had to dig through the layers of obligation and expectation to find the artifact of the person who used to live here. It was going to require stopping the performance, even if just for a minute, in the car, in the elevator, standing still in the kitchen. The body might be a stranger, a machine I vaguely recognized, but I had to start introducing myself again. Not as the CEO, the parent, or the partner, just as the tenant currently occupying the premises. The day was still long, but the objective had shifted. It wasn't about surviving the hours anymore. It was about recognizing the voice, however muffled, that was still trying to call out from the inside. The real fight wasn't against the calendar. It was against the silence. The decision to reintroduce myself didn't magically recharge the batteries. It just changed the voltage. I walked back into the living room, where the machinery of the day was already spinning. Emails, the kids needing breakfast supervision, the low hum of domestic urgency. The difference was that I was now observing the man performing these tasks, rather than simply being him. He moved slowly. That was the first note I took. Not slow like lazy, but slow like a diver in heavy pressure gear. Every step, every nod of acknowledgement, cost more energy than the result warranted. I sat down for the first virtual meeting. The screen lit up with faces I knew intimately. Colleagues, rivals, people who depended on my judgment. I spoke the language of Q3 projections and strategic pivots flawlessly. The words came out clear, sharp and confident. But the tongue that formed them felt thick, the lungs shallow. It was ventriloquism. The CEO puppet was talking, but the operator was tired, slumped backstage, wondering how many more performances were scheduled. The real exhaustion wasn't the hours. It was the maintenance of the performance. It was the constant psychological effort required to convince the world I was the man they needed me to be, while knowing the actual man was barely holding his own weight upright. This feeling, this cold detachment from my own skin, was the source of the silent frustration. I couldn't explain it. If I told my partner, she'd send me to a doctor who would run blood tests, declare everything within normal limits, and prescribe better sleep hygiene. If I told my peers, they'd assume burnout, maybe suggest a sabbatical, or a trip to some wellness retreat where I'd be forced to hike mountains I had no interest in climbing. But it wasn't burnout. Burnout felt too clinical for this. This was a structural failure of identity. The successful life I had meticulously built, the titles, the house, the stability, had acted like a heavy gilded shell. And now, at 44, the creature inside found the shell restrictive, too hot, and impossibly heavy. The calendar dictated I needed to be planning 5 years out. The body dictated I needed to plan the next 5 minutes. Can I make it to the kitchen for water without leaning on the counter? That was the new scale of ambition. I finished the meeting, clicked the exit button. The faces vanished, and the silence rushed back, heavier this time. I closed my eyes, tilting my head back against the leather chair. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of noise, the static of unresolved questions. What do you want? I used to have answers for that. More revenue. A better market position. Kids successfully launched. Now, the question felt predatory, stripping away everything external. The body, this foreign vehicle, demanded honesty. It wouldn't let me lie anymore. It wouldn't allow me to power through on ambition and coffee. It was forcing a fundamental renegotiation of the contract between mind and matter. The contract stated, "I will push you, and you will perform." The Find You body had submitted its resignation. The terms are unacceptable. Find a new objective. I sat there frozen, realizing the extent of the lie I'd been living. I had outsourced my inner life to my external achievements. The purpose of my existence had become synonymous with my output. When the capacity for output diminished, when the engine started sputtering, the purpose evaporated. That night, the kids were watching a movie. My partner was scrolling on her phone. The scene was perfectly domestic, perfectly safe, and I felt the most alone I had felt in decades. I looked at my hands resting on the armrest. They were large, capable hands, built for typing, shaking deals, steadying a child's bike. They looked familiar, but the current running through them felt alien. I stood up, needing to move, not towards a goal, but away from the stillness. I walked out the back door onto the deck. The air was cool and clean. I leaned on the railing, staring into the dark yard. The fight against silence, I realized, wasn't about finding the voice that shouted the old answers. It was about listening for the whisper that offered new ones. The whisper wasn't about success or money. It was smaller, quieter. It was about presence. If the body was a stranger, the only way to build trust was through consistency and attention. I had to stop, punishing it for failing to be the 30-year-old machine. I had to start treating it like a fragile, highly valuable artifact. I made a deliberate choice right there, on the cold deck. Tomorrow, there was a mandatory 6 a.m. call with the European division. For years, I had taken that call without question, driven by the belief that physical presence equals indispensable value. But the body was speaking, and for the first time, the answer was simple. No, I was going to delegate. I was going to sleep through that alarm. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of surrender to necessity. It was a tiny, selfish step in introducing myself to the new tenant. "Hello," I thought to the tired frame. "I see you, and tomorrow, we rest." The strange thing about deciding to rest, after 2 decades of answering every call, is that the silence of the morning felt louder than any alarm ever did. Woke 2 hours past the time I had historically labeled necessary for human function. There was no external disruption, no urgent beep from the phone, yet my internal clock, that ruthless administrator honed by years of performance anxiety, flung me awake with a jolt of pure dread. It was the visceral fear of having missed the critical window, of having let the entire fragile infrastructure of my life crumble because I had prioritized 2 extra hours of horizontal existence. The first thought was not comfort, but cataloging disaster. Did the important email get sent? Did the team lead the morning briefing? Did the client notice I wasn't the one responding? I lay there, still, breathing deeply, trying to coach myself down from the adrenaline spike. This wasn't a fire. This was just a Tuesday. But the guilt was immediate, heavy, and specific. It wasn't the righteous guilt of having committed an offense. It was the managerial guilt of having skipped a necessary shift. I had broken an unspoken contract with myself, the contract stating that my value was derived solely from my availability. Slowly, I reached for the phone, bracing for the inevitable flood of panicked messages. I scrolled through the notifications. There was a text from the junior delegate. "Morning. Took care of the 8 a.m. brief. Ran smoothly. Talk later." There was an email confirming the initial task was complete, routed correctly, and signed off. Silence. No chaos. No crisis. The world had turned on its axis, the required work had been executed, and the machinery of my professional life had functioned perfectly fine without my direct supervision. That realization hit harder than any stress I had absorbed in the previous year. It was a profound, subtle insult. I had spent so long believing I was the keystone, the one essential element, that discovering I was merely an interchangeable cog, albeit an experienced one, felt like an existential downgrade. The exhaustion I carried wasn't just physical wear and tear. It was the fatigue of performance, the burden of maintaining indispensability. And in that quiet, rested morning, the body I felt was a stranger, not because it looked different, but because it had finally betrayed the narrative the mind had written for it. The 44-year-old frame was rejecting the architecture of the 30-year-old ambition. The ambition was built on limitless energy, on the ability to absorb shocks and run on fumes. The reality was a nervous system that had entered into a quiet, cold rebellion. When I finally stood up, the fatigue was still there, but it was different. It wasn't the brittle, frantic exhaustion of having been pushed too far. It was the dull, stubborn ache of old neglect. I looked in the mirror, and the face staring back was too calm, too slow. It was the face of someone who was finally, reluctantly, listening. The feeling of being a stranger in my own skin wasn't about weight gain or wrinkles. It was the cognitive misalignment between the internal map, which still showed me as a high-output, low-maintenance machine, and the external reality of this heavy, finite organism demanding immediate negotiation. Who was this person who needed 9 hours of sleep? Who was this professional who could afford to miss the first critical hour of the day and not feel the need to apologize for it? I realized that the search for meaning, which had been outsourced to productivity for so long, now had to be repatriated. The struggle was no longer about maximizing output. It was about defining the minimum viable input required for peace. The small act of delegation was a declaration of war against my old self-worth metrics. If I wasn't essential in the way I always thought, then who was I? And more importantly, what was the body telling me to build instead of the exhausting monument of professional omnipresence? I knew then that the rest I had taken wasn't a recovery day. It was a baseline adjustment. The exhaustion wasn't the problem. The exhaustion was the compass. It was pointing directly away from the path I had spent half my life carving out. This forced recognition of limits, this surrender to the body's veto power, was the first, painful step toward introducing myself to the woman I was actually meant to be, rather than the machine I was expected to be. The next step couldn't be recovery. It had to be radical redesign. The radical redesign started not with a new diet or a workout plan, but with the ruthless deletion of things that used to define me. I had to look at my schedule, the artifact of the machine I used to be, and treat it like an enemy blueprint. It was engineered for output, optimized for compliance, and entirely deaf to the internal climate. The first few weeks were silent warfare against my own guilt complex. Saying no felt like a physical act of defiance, like pulling a lever that cuts power to a critical circuit. For 2 decades, my worth was tied directly to my utility, my availability, and my ability to absorb stress without cracking. When I slowed down, the world didn't stop spinning, but the expectation from those around me did not immediately adjust. They saw my reduced capacity as a temporary flaw, a glitch to be patched. "You just need a good vacation," they'd suggest, entirely missing the point that the structure of my life was the toxin, not the lack of sleep. Trying to explain to a high-achieving partner or a demanding boss that you are no longer interested in maximizing your efficiency feels like admitting to a moral failure in the modern age. It feels like betrayal. The isolation deepened. The machine self was well understood. It was predictable, reliable, and spoke the language of goals and metrics. The new, fragile self, the one guided by the compass of exhaustion, spoke only in whispers of need and boundaries. It was a language nobody around me had learned yet, maybe because I hadn't even learned it myself. I began observing my body like an anthropologist studying a newly discovered civilization. The aches, the sudden bursts of heat, the absolute non-negotiable fatigue that arrived at 3 p.m. These weren't symptoms of failure. They were communications. My body was finally talking back, demanding specific changes to the operating environment, and I had been too busy running the corporation to answer the internal memo. I looked in the mirror and saw the stranger. Not just the physical shift that time imposes, the softening around the edges, the lines that map accumulated history, but a fundamental disconnect between the effort I put in and the outcome I expected. I used to trust my muscles, trust my stamina. Now, every physical exertion felt like a gamble. Will I pay for this tomorrow? Will this 20-minute walk cost me a day of recovery? This negotiation forced a terrifying realization. I had spent years treating my body as a project to be managed, a tool to achieve external validation, rather than the place where I actually live. I had tried to bully it into compliance through crash diets and punishing routines, all attempts to force the vessel to hold more than its capacity. The radical redesign required dropping the bully stance. It meant accepting that the 44-year-old body has different physics. It doesn't need to be sculpted into the image of its 25-year-old counterpart. It needs to be maintained for longevity and internal peace. I swapped the high-intensity punishment for something that felt almost revolutionary. Gentle movement, stretching, walking, focusing on the quality of breath rather than the calorie burn. This shift was excruciatingly slow, partly because the old habits flared up like phantom limbs, demanding speed and sweat, and partly because the physical self was genuinely lagging. The most difficult part of the redesign was redefining success. If I wasn't successful because I was constantly doing, who was I? The answer wasn't glamorous. I was a person who needed silence, who needed space between tasks, who needed permission to stare out the window without assigning the activity a productivity score. The body was no longer a machine, and consequently, my identity could no longer be a function of production. It was a painful, stripping process, feeling like I was shedding a heavy, custom-made suit of armor that had protected me, but was now crushing my ribcage. The person underneath was softer, slower, and far more demanding of respect, not from the world, but from me. I realized that the exhaustion wasn't pointing away from my path. It was pointing toward the real path. It wasn't about finding the self I used to be. It was about allowing the self I was meant to be, the one that requires sustainable energy and deep purpose, rather than frantic action. To finally step forward and inhabit the house I'd been ignoring for decades. The stranger wasn't a stranger after all. She was just waiting for me to finally come home. Knowing the truth is often the easiest part. Living it is the battlefield. I had identified the stranger inside me. She was the authentic self, battered and exhausted, finally demanding occupancy. But now I had to introduce her to the world. I had to introduce her to my husband, my colleagues, and the friends who were used to the high-output, low-complaint version of me. That is where the real friction began. The body, once a tireless machine I treated like a rental car, became the new boss. And the boss didn't negotiate. If I tried to push past 9 p.m., the physical interest rate was exorbitant the next morning. Cognitive function crashed. Joint pain flared up. The feeling of swimming through mud returned instantly. This was the system establishing its new, non-negotiable boundaries. I started dropping commitments. Not gradually, but decisively. I canceled long-standing volunteer roles that felt like obligation rather than purpose. I stopped answering emails after 5 o'clock. I declined social invitations that promised noise and shallow conversation, choosing silence and deep rest instead. The silence that followed these cancellations was loud at first. It was awkward. People expected detailed, apologetic explanations for my sudden lack of availability. I stopped giving them. I distilled my response down to a simple, unadorned statement. I am unavailable. No reason required. People don't like it when you redefine your capacity. They preferred the old engine, reliable, predictable, overcommitted, and always running on borrowed fuel. My change wasn't just inconvenient for me. It was disruptive to the ecosystem I had maintained. My husband interpreted my need for solitude as withdrawal. My boss saw my refusal to take on extra projects as a lack of ambition. Friends worried I was depressed because in their lexicon, a life not filled with frantic activity must be a life of suffering. The difficult truth I absorbed was that their attachment wasn't to me, but to the service I provided. Once I separated that distinction, understanding that their disappointment was a reaction to lost convenience, not lost connection, the pain of their pushback lessened. It was necessary clarity. The purpose of my energy was changing radically. It was shifting from proving my worth to sustaining my existence. I wasn't trying to earn my place anymore. I was trying to inhabit it fully. This transition was not instant healing. Understanding why my body felt alienated didn't magically cure the stiffness in my neck or make the hormonal shifts disappear. I still had days where the weight of 44 years settled heavily on my shoulders, when I moved slowly, feeling thick and dull. The work became learning too, distinguish between pain, which demands investigation and fixing, and discomfort, which is simply part of the current physiological weather. I learned to move with the discomfort, treating my body not as a problem to be solved, but as a complex machine that finally required proper maintenance schedules. I looked at my job again. I had built a career on high-speed reaction, agility, and quick fixes. Now, I craved slow, thoughtful creation. I needed work that didn't just consume time, but produced something lasting, something resonant. The fear of being less professionally, less responsive, less dominant, vanished when I realized being purposeful was infinitely more powerful than being busy. I started stripping away the layers of administrative filler and meaningless meetings until I found the core tasks I genuinely enjoyed, the ones that fed the soul instead of draining the clock. This integration is a daily practice. It is the steady, quiet work of staying home. Every morning is a new choice to honor the boundaries of this new, slower self. It means acknowledging the limits of the tank before I even start the engine. I haven't found the definitive answer to the question, will I ever feel like myself again? I found a better, more useful question. Who is the self I am becoming, and how do I serve her today? The old self was an echo of expectation. The new self is a fierce, quiet energy demanding authenticity. She doesn't perform, she simply exists. And in that simple existence, the house no longer feels haunted by a stranger. It just feels lived in. The ultimate relief of being 44 is that the clock has run out on performing for the wrong audience. That labor, the endless, exhausting work of managing the optics of a life that wasn't entirely yours, was the true source of the fatigue. It wasn't just the lack of sleep or the slowing thyroid. It was the energy required to maintain the illusion of unlimited resources, unlimited patience, unlimited time, and unlimited youth. When you finally choose to honor the question, how do I serve the self I am becoming today? The first thing that happens is a radical simplification. The silent contracts you had with the external world, the ones that demanded you show up bright, sharp, and apologetically successful, are quietly, ruthlessly revoked. The new self, the authentic one that finally moved into the lived-in house, doesn't entertain those demands. She requires silence. She prioritizes the quality of the small interactions over the volume of the grand ones. She starts saying no, not aggressively, but with the flat, calm certainty of a boundary marker that has been in place for decades. This is where the true exhaustion begins to lift, because the deepest drain was always the cognitive dissonance. You were trying to live an adult life in a body that was changing, while using the emotional operating system of your 20s, the one that believed effort alone could reverse gravity and time. The truth is, Your body doesn't feel like a stranger. It feels like a veteran, a body that has recorded every late night, every stress spike, every necessary pivot. It holds the history of everything you survived, and it is now demanding a higher standard of care based on that accumulated data. The stiffness in the morning isn't weakness. It's a non-negotiable request for better fuel, better rest, and less frantic striving. We spend so much of our youth treating the body like an eternally patient machine. We push it, starve it, over-caffeinate it, and then we are shocked, truly shocked, when the warranty expires and it starts giving us detailed feedback. The shift at 44 is realizing that you can stop fighting the evidence. The evidence is simply life. The physical changes, the softening, the slowing, the need for glasses, they are not flaws. They are documentation. They are proof you were here, that you participated. The question of whether you will feel like yourself again presupposes that the best version of yourself is located in the past, waiting to be recovered like lost luggage. This is the great trap of midlife, trying to retrieve what cannot be retrieved. You are not meant to recover who you were. You are meant to build who you are becoming. The fierce, quiet energy of the new self understands that identity is not a noun. It is a continuous verb. It is the act of choosing. It is the act of aligning your external actions with your internal reality, even when that reality is messy, tired, or unpopular. And that is the answer to the haunting feeling. That sense of the stranger in the mirror wasn't your body betraying you. It was your soul, telling you that the life you were living was no longer aligned with the person you had evolved into. The stranger was the person you were pretending to be, superimposed over the person you actually were. To feel like yourself again is simply to drop the performance. It means recognizing that the power of this age is not in the ability to do everything, but in the knowledge of what not to do anymore. The power is in knowing precisely where your energy must be spent and refusing to spend it anywhere else. The peace that finally settles in is the realization that the most valuable commodity you possess is your own alignment. And when you commit to serving that alignment, serving the woman who is tired, who is discerning, who is finally done apologizing for needing space, the exhaustion begins to recede. You won't feel like the 25-year-old version of yourself, because you are not meant to. You will feel like the 44-year-old version, a woman who is slower, quieter, infinitely more strategic, and utterly uninterested in external validation. And in that quiet, lived-in space, she is finally free. She is finally home.